Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPhone 8 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2024. It's a brand new year, and I will tell you there are a lot of devices to go ahead and review this particular year, and the iPhone 8 is a very interesting one because last year was basically the year that this phone got unsupported with software. There were so many random things that happened in 2023, and the fact that this phone actually ended up getting discontinued was kind of sad. I feel like this phone probably could have been supported for like another 2 years, or honestly could have probably been supported for like another 5 years. But I think with its last year being on iOS 16, I think it was okay. It wasn't terrible. I'm surprised the iPhone 10 didn't get iOS 17, to be honest. I thought they were going to do something different this year, but that ended up not being the case. And the thing I will definitely tell you about the iPhone 8 is that it's a good phone. It's a good phone for what it was at the time in 2017 when this thing came out, but clearly I wouldn't really be the first one to recommend buying this phone anymore, and you would be much, much better off purchasing something maybe like the, iPhone, 11, iPhone 12. Those types of devices are going to be giving you a much better experience than this thing pretty much every single way. So just kind of keep that in mind, but regardless, let's go and see how this phone holds up. On the front side, on this particular device, you are basically getting a 4.7-inch IPS panel. Now, this is kind of a multi-part story because on one hand, it's a very outdated panel. It really doesn't look that great. But on the other hand, this is basically the same type of display you were getting on something like an iPhone SE 3rd generation. So when you look at a device like the iPhone SE 3 that Apple is currently still selling, it's actually insane because that is a current $429 phone, but the iPhone 8 is essentially like an outdated, it's supposed to be an outdated phone, but you'd be surprised how similar. There's a lot of overlap between something like an iPhone 8 and the iPhone SE 3. The iPhone 8 you can buy for like $100 and something right now. The iPhone SE 3rd generation, pretty much like $429. Think about the amount of difference in that price tag, and the bodies are almost identical between both, which is pretty insane. You're getting the Touch ID sensor on the front, 60 hertz panel. It's an IPS panel as well, so it's really not even that great of a panel for the most part. But I've seen worse, and I've definitely seen better since then. But it's just one of those things that happens when you're getting a display like this. On the bottom, you're getting that Lightning port, which is great. Still, USB-C is amazing, but this thing is still good enough for the most part. Very thin phone at that too. It's a pretty thin phone when it comes down to it. On the back side, you're getting that standard glass back, so no frosted glass back, but still like a decent back for the most part. Single wide-angle camera on the back as well. Wireless charging, IP certification. There's still a lot to love about this particular phone, but like I mentioned, it's a fairly outdated looking body. This thing just, it's not as good as it used to be, and that just is kind of what happens when you're buying this type of phone. You are getting an outdated body, an outdated style, and that's just kind of one of the sad things. But like I said, I've seen worse phones since then, but this is definitely, from a body standpoint, it definitely doesn't look that great, if I'm being completely honest. But the camera is another one of those areas that doesn't really hold up that well either. This thing had a single 12 megapixel camera on the back. It's a wide angle lens on the front, 7 megapixel 1080p sensor. And what can I say about this camera that hasn't already been said by me for years now? It's a pretty basic camera. There's not really any advantage of buying a phone like this in terms of the camera standpoint. And it's sad to say, but that's just kind of what happens when you're buying a phone like this. When you're getting a phone like an iPhone 8, I hope you kind of know that you are getting a very, very outdated camera. When you look at a device, for example, like an iPhone, let's just take like an iPhone 11 let's just take an iPhone XR for example. We all know that the iPhone XR camera really isn't that great. It's very, very outdated when it comes down to it in every single way. But the iPhone XR can film in 4K, 60 on the back, 1080p at 60 on the front, has portrait mode, and even the iPhone XR camera is kind of outdated to today's standards. The iPhone 8's camera is very outdated. It basically only has a single sensor, no portrait mode, no cinematic mode, only 1080p at 30 on the front, and it's not really that good of a camera. I think we all know this. I don't want to bash on this particular camera too much, but once again, that's just kind of what happens when you're buying a phone like this. So once again, I don't really want to recommend a phone to people if the camera is already severely outdated, and once again, that's just kind of what's happening when you're getting a device like this. So take it as you will. It's not the end of the world, but it's really not that great of a camera. And once again, that's just kind of what's happening when you're getting a phone like this. Now, in terms of the software side of things, this particular phone is kind of outdated, and that's kind of what happened last year. So on iOS 16, when this phone was still getting iOS 16 updates, which it still is getting iOS 16 updates, this was a pretty solid phone. I thought it was good. If you wanted to kind of buy a phone and kind of move on with your life, this was like an option, I guess. But, when it kind of comes down to right now, this is an outdated phone already from a hardware standpoint. Now it's an outdated phone from a software standpoint. So you're really getting it from basically both sides. Like, it's really not a phone worth buying from either way. you could kind of make the argument that on iOS 16, this phone is still kind of getting software support. It's like maybe you could, like I said, kind of make an argument that this phone is still worth buying from that perspective. But even then, like, it just doesn't make too much sense to buy a phone like this as of this point, because you're already outdated from software, at least from like main software updates. Once again, you are much, much better off buying something like, an iPhone XR that is still getting iOS 17 updates rather than buying this type of phone from this particular standpoint. So just kind of keep that in mind. I don't want to keep bashing this phone too much, but that's just kind of what is happening when you're purchasing a phone like this as of this point. Now, from a performance standpoint, this device is kind of interesting. So it has that Apple A11 Bionic chip inside of it with 2 gigabytes of RAM. On paper, that is a very slow phone, to be honest. It's really not that fast. It is kind of outdated when it comes down to already from a software standpoint. I will say though, the A11 Bionic really wasn't that terrible. I've definitely had worse performing chipsets than this thing. And I think that's kind of a good advantage of an iPhone 8. You could make the argument that this type of device really isn't terrible from that standpoint. And I think that's like a decent thing to kind of keep in mind when you're buying this phone. On the other hand, it is very, very low in RAM. When you look at a phone like an iPhone 11, again, that's like a pretty basic phone you'd expect from 2019. That phone has twice the amount of RAM as this thing. So you can just kind of put 2 and 2 together. This is a fairly slow phone. From things that I've personally done with it, I've compared it against the iPhone, 10s, the iPhone 11s, 12s, 10Rs, 13s, 14s, 15s. For years, I've been comparing this phone to, and it definitely has shown its age. It's definitely gotten slower and slower. If you need a basic phone for an individual who just wants to do like iMessage and texting and FaceTime calls and maybe going on Twitter and Instagram and taking photos and sending them, this is probably more than enough, to be completely honest. But if you're an actual user of an iPhone and you're going to be taking advantage of the plethora of different applications that are available on the App Store, this is going to be giving you not only a weird time when it comes down to like the actual performance of it all, but also the lack of gesture-based design just kind of aged this phone too. Like, you have to constantly click a button to go back home. That is kind of outdated. That's an outdated architecture. And I wouldn't even recommend going down that road, because it's going to be kind of hard to go from this phone to a gesture-based design. You might as well just jump into like an iPhone 10 at that point. But even then, why buy that? Buy an iPhone 10 or buy an iPhone 11. The battery life is also not that good on this phone anymore either. If you buy this phone, you're probably going to have to carry some sort of power bank with you or something along those lines, because it's just going to be a very, very bad battery life. I've done so many battery tests on this thing. iOS 16 kind of helped it a little bit from iOS 15, but it's still going to basically not give you that great of an experience in terms of battery. So to kind of sum it up, what I'll definitely tell you is, I think a device like the iPhone 8 isn't really worth buying in this day and age. I think it is pretty outdated in pretty much every single way you could ever think about it. The only reason I would even recommend buying an iPhone 8 is if you are, for some reason, like on an extreme budget, or somebody is giving you an iPhone 8, or iPhone 8s are only available in your area. But even then, I would just recommend saving up some more money. Maybe save like an extra like $20, $30, because going from an iPhone 8 to an iPhone XR is maybe like a $30 to $50 difference. You might as well just go for the iPhone XR and go down that road, rather than kind of having a weirder experience on an iPhone 8. You might as well just wait until the iPhone XR or iPhone 11 and then just go buy those ones. It's a major difference in my opinion. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.